Excellent. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. I know we've had a lot of these discussions this week and this past week. First, I want to go ahead and thanks to the Texas Law groups that have supported us and advertised this event. I thank HELA, TULSA, If One How, the American Constitutional Society, Federal Society. I also want to thank LBJ, School of Public Policy, for promoting to their students, as well as the Steve Hicks School of Social Work. We cannot forget about social workers in this conversation. Also want to thank Grassroots Leadership for supplying the pizza and drinks and things. So I'm going to do a quick introduction of all the invitees that we have, the people with the name tags. There's a lot of them, and I'm not going to do them justice in my short introductions because there are so many years of experience and accomplishments that I'm going to gloss over, so forgive me in advance. First, Honorable Judge Elizabeth Earle from Criminal County Court number 7. Judge Williams are with us as well. Amanda Wu, Executive Director of Texas Fair Defense Project and Chair of the Indigent Legal Services Working Group. Jeff Burkhardt, Executive Director of TIDC. Dr. Mike Lauderdale from the UT School of Social Work. Dr. William Kelly from the UT Sociology and Criminology, who's a professor. Annette Price, Grassroots Leadership, Texas Advocates for Justice, statewide coordinator. Rebecca Sanchez, community organizer from Grassroots Leadership. Chris Roberts and Katie Dyer, they are UT Law Clinic professors. And four board members.
We'll pass.
Also, Madeline Michon and Karen Sova were the co-presidents of the Indigent Defense Group. So the Indigent Defense Group is a new student group at Texas Law, specifically for future public defenders. I'm also in that group. My name is Nicholas Sawyer. I'm the policy analyst for IDG. So, Michelle Deitch, the Texas Law LBJ professor specializing in criminal justice. Chris Harris from Just Liberty and organizer. Skip Davis, criminal defense attorney. And Ranjana Narajan, who's a Texas Law clinic professor with the Civil Rights Clinic. So join me in thanking our invitees. So, like I said, there's been a lot of discussion about the Public Defender's Office from the past weeks and ongoing, I'm sure. But tonight I want to set a special intention for the conversation. Typically a lot of the talk has been about funding and money, and those things are very important. But we have law students around. When you talk about math and numbers, they get a little skittish. So for their sake, we're going to talk about something else. I think that it's really important when talking about indigent defense to talk about culture. Because the special, unique culture that having a public defender's office brings, compared to a more maybe siloed, managed-assigned system, it's really important. Because the attorneys that work for public defender's offices, when they're hired, they're very specifically vetted for the kinds of values and the ideologies that they have. And so at IDG, a lot of what we're doing is helping students kind of understand the importance of being client-centered and client-focused. And really be able to approach these interviews at public defenders' offices so we understand how important the culture of public defenders' offices are. And so I personally, I'm really excited about how a public defender's office can really transform the culture of an indigent defense system here in Travis County. So all the kind of questions that I hope to pose to the invitees are around what this looks like. So one really cool thing about changes in culture is that it doesn't have to cost money. So for the next hour, we're going to have a couple questions for the invitees, and then after that we'll open up the floor. I'd ask that maybe, because we have so many awesome invitees, that we keep our answers a little short, and that if you're in the audience and you have a question or a comment, maybe hold that until the end. And so without further ado, I'll pass it off to Jeff, who will be moderating for us. So.
Right. Cool. Hey, how y'all doing? Hey. I have some great questions that we're going to get to through that a lot of law students put together. First, I want to start off with this for Miss Katie Dyer. Who cares? Why are we even here? Who cares about this stuff? And we're talking about people who have I don't think it's a bunch of criminals. Why do we care what happens to them?
I think we all care about what happens to them because these are folks that are going to be in our communities no matter what. And so when someone has an interaction with the criminal justice system, it obviously has the ability to alter not just their lives, but their family members' lives, their coworkers' lives, the lives of others around. And I think when we're talking about Travis County and certain things that we want to preserve about Austin and certain neighborhoods that we're working on keeping rooted in the history of this town, we have to look at where people are going and how long people are going away for and what that impact is on the community. So it's not always about whether somebody did it or didn't do it, but it's about getting to know that person, how they got to the criminal justice system, and how we can get them out of the criminal justice system as painlessly as possible for them and the people around them.
You're almost making it sound like the people who go through the criminal justice system are human beings who deserve respect.
Oh,
and care.
hell.
That's a radical stance.
How dare you?
Yeah, right. All right, so I care. So Katie, thank you. That I care quite a bit. Oh, sorry, Professor Dyer, I care quite a bit. So turning to Amanda Wu. All right, so I care about this. I care about criminal justice. I want the right thing to happen for these folks. You know, these are my cousins, these are my friends, these are my neighbors, these are people in my community going through this. Whether or not they did something, whatever it is, we want them coming out the other side. We want their lives to be good. We want to help them reintegrate in society. During the indigent defense process, we toss around words like public defender and managed assigned counsel system. What are those two things? What's the difference? Why is it?
Sure. So I think I'll kind of start with a kind of more bird's eye view of why public defense matters in the system that I'm talking about. We all know that we have a bloated system of mass incarceration that has been able to grow for decades now, and I think part of the question is how did we get here and how do we get out of it? Our system is premised on the idea that it's adversarial, right? So you have a prosecutor who represents the government, and you have a defense attorney representing the person who is charged with the crime. And there's a real concern in an adversarial system about the breakdown of that system when it doesn't operate in that way. That is why the Sixth Amendment enshrines the right to counsel in criminal cases, I think, is really to uphold that kind of goal of having when the government is coming down on something, having it duked out, having people fighting for the person who is being charged. So I think that the fact that that has ended up in our Constitution speaks volumes to the importance of having not only adequate but quality defense for people when faced with the power of the government. So to your question sort of about the system in Travis County and why we're talking about a public defender office right now, I think Nick touched upon this a lot in his introduction. But I think a public defender office is sort of institutionally situated to bring up and protect and serve the people who they're representing. And that is not to say anything against the badass criminal attorneys who are representing people every day. It's about structural difference and bringing up a culture that is centered around the client and provides the kind of resources and support that you need to really fight for your client. So I think that's why we're here today, because I and many others who have been a part of this process from the beginning believe that the time is now to bring up that sort of institution and culture in Travis County. In fact, we're pretty overdue for it. We really stand out as a community when you compare our now large urban jurisdiction, which of course has changed in Travis County over the past couple decades, with just about every other large urban jurisdiction, not only in Texas, but in the United States. And just about every other one, except for Austin, Travis County, has a hybrid system of an institutional public defender office with salaried defenders, which serves the broader community and also the clients, and a system of appointed private attorneys who also take in cases.
So it sounds like we're talking about systems, not individuals necessarily when it comes to the attorneys, right? You could have a good attorney outside the PD office, right?
Of course.
So let's turn to that topic of systems. So Rebecca, I want to turn to you. And I want to put you on the spot a little bit and challenge you on this, because generally, I think you have been a big part of the advocacy community, a big proponent of public defender offices. The MAC has been around about 4 years, 5 years. And the MAC, I think in a lot of people's eyes, has been an improvement of what came before it. So before we talk, and I do want to talk about some of the differences in a little more detail between the MAC and the PD.
Okay.
But what do you see as some of the improvements of the MAC over what came before it?
Well, first I definitely want to go back to the first question of why and reiterate that we have a legacy of white supremacy and criminalization of black and brown bodies. This isn't just about who's a criminal and who is not. This is about very targeted enforcement of entire communities and erasures of them. So whenever we talk about the weapons that the government has at their disposal and the money that they have at their disposal to make sure those black and brown bodies never exist again or are taken away from their families or put behind bars so that nobody ever thinks about them again, we do need something institutional at our defense. And so whenever I think about something as kind of individualized as a managed assigned counsel program, where is that foundational piece of defending people going to exist? Where's the institutional voice that goes against? I think during some of the working group meetings, we were told we should go after the prosecutor, we should be at the state legislature. Yeah, been there, done that. Where is the defense bar doing that? I haven't seen them, I haven't seen this group, I haven't seen this entity also working in the same way. So I just want to highlight that it's not just about who's committing crimes and what do we do with them. We're talking about people that ever since existence in this United States as we see it, that have been punished over and over and over again. So we're here to voice against that, advocate against that every step of the way. So your first question, well, your question to me originally is that it is better than what we had. Okay? That's kind of where that stops. That is where that argument stops, is that it's better than what existed. That is not us going full force. That is not us fighting as much as possible in every avenue that we can. That seems to be the extent of that argument, is that it's better than what it was.
It's kind of like a compared to what, you know?
Well, let me pull apart some things that you're putting out there, because I think you brought up a really interesting question. Just push, when we talk about, we heard this, I think, on Monday, and we've heard this in work group and a lot of other places, that we're talking about public defense. We're talking about indigent defense and how do we improve it. And a lot of folks kind of try to go over to the left or the right and say, let's talk about prosecution, or let's talk about reentry, or let's talk about policing. Tonight, again, we're talking about indigent defense. So, Chris, hear us. When we're talking about indigent defense, those people who are reform-minded, that see problems in the criminal justice system, we see classism, we see racism, we see xenophobia, we see all these isms that creep into this system.
I would say that those are the constructs of this system.
That the system is built on.
Correct. I would not say that those are byproducts of it.
So if that's the case, and our goal is to reform this whole system, why do we care about indigent defense? Why aren't we spending our time in prosecution? Why is indigent defense a critical part to this reform? Or what is it?
Well, honestly, that's a really good question, and I think it's one that people that are working to, in many ways, begin to really roll back or dismantle the criminal justice system as it's existed, are talking about, right? What is the best avenue for us to really begin to really divest from that system and invest in other areas, right? We use the criminal justice system as a healthcare provider, as a treatment provider, as all these other things, right? And it's really, really bad at those things. And so, obviously, we need these other things, and how do we get them? Well, we have to divest from this system. And I think, there is a question within the advocacy community about whether or not indigent defense is the right way. But I think ultimately it is that institutional presence that both Amanda and Rebecca have spoken to. Because in addition to providing sort of that case-by-case defense for folks, it also can be its own tool for advocacy for greater reforms at large within the system. Few people are more well-positioned to talk about the real issues that exist within all the various avenues of criminal justice than a defense attorney. A defense attorney with a real knowledge of the law and a real caring of people and understanding the humanity of all the people that they represent, is really well positioned to make critiques of that system. Coupled with the institutional power that a public defender can bring, that actually can be another really powerful tool within the kind of general reform movement to push for and achieve real change. And you're seeing that in those communities that have really strong public defender systems, and we hope Austin will join.
So it sounds like, so a public defender, you're advocating for the client directly, but you can also be an agent for change institutions. No, so one of the greatest people we had, we just had a big loss in the public defense community nationally, and that was a man named Jeff Adoption. He was the chief public defender in San Francisco for many years. Jeff was a big time advocate inside the courtroom, he was a great litigator, but also was actually, he took to the streets. He was out there, he was marching, they're actually going to name a street after him in San Francisco. One of the things that Jeff did was use social workers a lot. When I came up as a public defender, we had no social workers, it was not a thing. Why are social workers important in this system, Paul Lindsay?
Well, the criminal defense attorney only has certain things that they can do. A criminal defense attorney represents the person in court, but most of their life happens outside of court. So a social worker is someone who can give them resources in the community, things that they would need, and also can bring to the criminal defense attorney some kind of an insight into the person's life and what they may be going through. Because at the end of the day, the defense attorney is supposed to tell that person's truth in court. And if they can't be there the whole time, then the social worker has an opportunity to give them more insight into where the person's coming from and where their defense ought to go.
So, Dr. Kelly, you want to pick up where
Yeah.
off as far as social workers? What else?
Well, I think I think what we're talking about here is one of the most critical issues facing American criminal justice today. Everyone's talking about reform, but nobody knows what the hell that means. Everybody has an idea, we're going to change this, we're going to change this, we're going to make a change over here. I'm really an impatient person. I'm tired of all this piecemeal crap. And I think, honestly, that the defense bar is probably could be the most important agents for change, period. Should be, but I think can be. Are there any prosecutors in the room? Oh, good. I'll get out of here.
Wait a minute, former prosecutors in the room?
Well, there's one right next to you.
Oh, yeah, we have a couple. 3, 4.
Are they 3 foreign prosecutors? I think, there's probably general consensus that prosecutors are the most important decision makers in the criminal justice system. Sorry, Elizabeth, I know judges like to think they are. But, they make all the key decisions. They also drive policy, whether we know it or not, either explicitly or implicitly. How did we get to be tough on crime? What were the key agents in our path to being tough on crime as prosecutors? How do we change that? Well, I think one way to go about changing that is to enhance the role of public defense, to challenge the role of prosecutors. Robert Pittman and I, a most recent book came out in October. We interviewed public defenders, assigned counsel, prosecutors, judges, and asked them all kinds of questions about the relative positions of all of those in terms of who's doing what roles they have. One of the things I was struck by, first of all, we asked prosecutors, what is your role in terms of reducing recidivism? What do y'all think was the common answer?
0.
What?
None.
What? What are you talking about? So right off the bat, prosecutors don't have an interest in achieving the underlying, in my mind, the underlying goal of American criminal justice. The reason your courtroom is so full is because of recidivism. 2/3 of the people that you see, that any judge sees in Travis County, has been there at least one time before. The reason we have such, high caseloads for prosecutors and public defenders and assigned counsel and judges' dockets is because we don't effectively reduce recidivism. What prosecutors and defense lawyers told us was it's up to defense counsel to identify when someone has a mental health problem, a substance use disorder, neurocognitive impairment, an intellectual deficit. what the hell is going on? Why is it up to defense counsel who say in the same breath, I'm not a psychiatrist, I went to law school. What do I know about these things? We need to be able to give key decision makers better information. I don't see the culture of the prosecutor's office changing anytime soon. I think, there's much focus on John Crusoe, bless his heart. I can't wait to see what happens. Sean Dick in Williamson County. Williamson County, of all places, is getting innovated by criminal justice policy. I think that sort of the underlying current here that really needs to get very proactive is the defense bar. I mean, they have a lot more power than they think they do. If they can bring in clinical expertise to assist in decision making, to assist prosecutors make better decisions. Plea bargaining should not be negotiating punishment. It should be negotiating the best options for an outcome. The way it is today is, time. How much time are you willing to do, rather than what is it going to take to keep this guy from coming back? And I don't see prosecutors initiating that conversation. I see the defense bar initiating that conversation. Anyhow,
All right, so we care about our fellow human beings going through this system. We know we're focused on systems, not necessarily individuals. We know we care about social workers. We know that defenders have a big role to play in the criminal justice reform more broadly. We know that they have more power than they think they do, and that the primacy of public defenders in reforming criminal justice is important. And we should be using social workers. And they have a big role to play. It's not public defense of 40, 50 years ago. So Chris Roberts, professor at UT, you ready?
Oh, yes, I'll be.
All right, tough question. We decided we want a public defender office. We have a sense of what we want it to look like. We want social workers. We want a good culture. We want them out there in the streets. We want them reforming the system. We want them pushing us forward. Who do you hire as a chief public defender? Don't give me a name, but...
I've got one in mind.
Larry Craster already has a job.
So,
He's a prosecutor now.
who do we hire as chief public defender? I mean, what do you look for in somebody, Nick had, I thought, a pretty eloquent intro here where we're focused on culture and changing the culture. And actually, in the case of the public defender office, setting a new culture. What are you looking for in your chief?
Well, the chief is going to define the culture, right? Ultimately, everything is going to come from the top down. If you find a good public defender's office, you are going to find someone at the head of it who has the ethos that you want at the top. I was thinking as we were listening to various people talk about the public defender as an agent of change, and I think one of the things that struck me when I thought about that was my first office was in Durham, North Carolina. The public defender at the time there, they had thrust upon him the responsibility for assigning all cases. So he was also doling out, to all of us who were on his staff, but to everybody in sight. And I will never forget watching a defense lawyer do something where that individual essentially appeared to be advocating for his client to be held. And I went...
To be what?
To be held, detained.
To be detained.
And I walked into his office and I said, I want to be really careful here because I do not know the whole story. But I did not think that I would be doing right if I didn't come and talk to you about what I saw today by this appointed lawyer, not someone in our office. His response was, everyone in this building is my client. Every single person that has an appointed lawyer is my client, and I have put them on loan to someone else. And so if anyone is not doing right by any indigent client, that is my problem. So thank you for telling me. And I think that's the attitude that you have to have, other than the co-defendant you're throwing into the bus to save your own. But in all seriousness, I think building a culture of this person stands at the head of creating a culture that is both concerned about every single indigent person that comes through the courthouse, about how to get them through the kinds of things that we've been talking about. It is a person who is willing to stand up and stick up for his or her lawyers because they have to be willing to engage and stand out in front In the same way that we have to be willing to stand between our clients and the things that are coming at our clients in this system. We talk about in our class the fact that this criminal justice system is a train, and it is there to run over your clients, and the role of the defense lawyer is to get in the way. At whatever personal cost you have, that is your problem. And you have to have people that are willing to set that tone, and that also means that the person who is at the top has to believe that, and they have to believe it about the lawyers that are working with them, but they ultimately have to believe it the most about the clients themselves. So that's the head.
But that head also has to provide incentives for all the line people to do what his leadership indicates.
But it is leadership by example.
Well, sure, absolutely.
I mean, I
But
think it is-
reinforcement is more powerful.
I do think that it is in many instances, it is leadership by example. The people that I have seen at the heads of offices have been willing to roll up their sleeves and get involved in anything they had to get involved in. They have been willing to represent clients at all levels. They never saw themselves as being above the fray in any way, shape, or form. If they came down, if there was a problem in a given courtroom, they made sure that they picked up a case in that courtroom so that they could see it themselves. You know, and everybody knew that this was a person who was standing up. And it's hard not to get in line behind that. The people that I worked with in DC in the Public Defender Service, there was a standard that was set. The expectation was so high for what you would be willing to do to try to help your clients in whatever way that you could. And as an office goes on and develops that culture, that's what develops it. It's the heads being willing to get in there and do the things that nobody else wants to do, and people will follow it. People will absolutely follow it.
So, Annette, I want to ask you a similar question. So, in most counties, a lot of times citizens can't name a judge in the county or a DA in the county. There's an even smaller chance they can name who the chief public defender is. That defender often takes a much smaller role in the public eye. Why do we care as Travis County about who the chief public defender is going to be? And related to the question for Professor Roberts, what qualities do you want in that chief public defender?
I want a public defender, a chief public defender that sees people as humans. We have to get back to that, because once a person gets arrested, they're just thrown by the wayside. You know, it doesn't matter. They become a number. They become the criminal. They become a person that got arrested. A chief public defender should be one that has a high standard for themselves, a high standard that this office is going to make sure that, like you said, that it's client focused, it's client centered. And I'm sorry, we don't want to talk about money, but hey,
Apologies, Nick, but go ahead.
You know, human lives is more important than money. And we have to understand that. We have to stop criminalizing people simply because we get a paycheck for that. I want a chief public defender that looks at a person that's been arrested as a human being and do whatever they can to save that person and to help that person and not lock them behind cages. So if he has that philosophy, then we're good. He or she, or they.
Judge Earl, I want to ask you a question about, and some of the students wrote about this, and this actually comes back to something that Rebecca, you touched on. So the proposed public defender office, it looks like it would take 30% of cases. CAPDS is still part of the system, taking 70% of cases roughly. How do those, so we're talking about culture, we're talking about improving the overall system. I think talking to people in CAPS, certainly there are they've got a rough ride through the media and everything, but certainly there's some problems that need to be changed, that need to be addressed, and I think everybody recognizes that. As a public defender office is built up and we still have CAPS, how do you think these officers should interact? How can they support each other, and more importantly, how can they support people who are persons who are going through the criminal justice system?
Well, it's a good question, because we just were talking the other day, mannequins shared about the proposal, about what it would look like possibly. We don't even know what it actually would look like, but I think what most of those have shared, and I'm speaking for myself here, is that we have some great lawyers in Travis County, and they are working really, really hard, but they need some support. And I think that's across the board. And that's if it's part of CAPS, it's part of the MAP, it's part of the public defender's office. My hope is with the public defender's office and with that support, Dr. Kelly mentioned before, where you have the social workers, you have the immigration lawyers, you have the people who are, yes, sir.
So I hear you leading into this idea about immigration lawyers. By the way, my name is Sid Williams. I'm a member of the board of directors for CAPCS. I'm former president of Austin Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, and I'm sitting on the board. My question is, how do you ensure with CAPS and with the public defender's office that they have the same access to those resources to be able to provide the same quality of indigent that food represents?
I was getting to that point.
So real quick, so we're
Still my thunder, I'll just make sure that as I'm going to say, because my concern is that I want both to have that support. So how would that both see that? I don't know how that would look, because I have not seen the final proposal. My hope would be, because we do have some great lawyers in Travis County, and I don't want it to be a comparable, I don't want them to be competing. I want it to, my hope is that it would work together, and that support system, the social workers, the immigration lawyers, the staff, everything would be able to be shared.
You see a rising tide.
I hope so. I know it's all about, we're not going to talk about money, right?
I know, it's hard though.
But you have to a little bit, because in a perfect world, we should know what the top number is. And then and once we know what that top number is, then whoever who's above my pay grade, that would say, okay, this is how much this needs, this is how much juvenile defender's office, this is how much the mental health defenders need, this is how much the civil needs, because maybe we can work together if someone has a CPS case and a criminal case, and may not, maybe separate lawyers, so they have separate expertise, of course, but they can share social work services, and there's so many other ways of doing that. But so we do need to talk a little bit about money, about knowing about what that top number is, so you can make sure that everyone has the right resources and are not competing with one another. That make sense?
So, and we're going to open up to questions. We'll let that one slide back. That's a good question.
City's my friends, I think.
But we've got 15 more minutes. We'll open up to questions for everybody. But to segue, and Skip, you've been waiting very patiently because
I'm not waiting, I'm just watching it.
So, you know, one of the questions that Steve brought up, and I think it's a good one, is we keep on talking about money, and the money is important. We can't get away from that. But tonight we're trying to put that on the back burner to the extent that we can. What are changes, whether it's building a public defender office? Let's say we have the office built, and what changes and what things would you like to see that don't cost money? Or to CAPS. What kind of improvements will we have in CAPS that don't cost money? What would you do?
Well, I think the first and most profound absence in Travis County's indigent defense plan is a contract signed between the attorney himself who's doing the representation in court and the court-appointed client. We don't have a contract. They kind of sometimes meet in the bathroom, in the hallway, on the telephone, but there's no formalization of the relationship and the communication of the expectation that the client sees, and the same responsibilities from the lawyer to the client, upon the client. And so that I think is the most profound and fundamental problem that we have, is we just don't have a meeting of the minds of what is adequate defense. That's why we have the anecdotal information we've been hearing from Chris and from others in the community complaining about the situation as it is, which brings us to the table here. So I think the first and most important thing to do is establish what the roles are. We know that, okay, you're a lawyer, you're a defense guy, and here's your client, and they kind of look at each other, and then the client kind of says, well, I trust you, do what you got to do. And the guy comes back and says, well, you plead guilty, but you should go home tonight. All right. Yeah, I'll see that, but then the consequences are sometimes so significant that it has the deleterious impacts down the road. Housing, funding for college, if you get a drug crime, it's simple as, just do a day in jail, call it time served, and your marijuana case now excluded you from your financial aid obligations or opportunities.
No driver's license?
No driver's license, and all these things compound to poor people.
You didn't tell me all this stuff about it.
Well, I didn't really think you needed to know. But that's part of the contractual obligation, I think, between the parties. And likewise, we don't have the contractual relationship established between CAPS and its own attorneys. So there is no oversight of the attorneys who are employed by CAPS by contract, which would be very simple to fix. hey, I get to look at your books, we'll go ahead and create the privity issue that Ms. Wu spoke about the other day, privity contract. We don't have the opportunity to get involved in the interworkings of the attorney-client relationship because we haven't established who has the responsibility to have the oversight or access into these kinds of things. So I think the most fundamental and simplest solution to some of these issues are two. One, I think that the misdemeanor division, the misdemeanors bloat the system by triple. Yet we spend triple the money on a few felonies. It would strike me that of all the people who are affected, we would be pushing the money to resolve these little minor cases that have what, not penitentiary impacts, but they have the kind of impacts that make it difficult for regular people to get a license, to get around, to get a job, and do those things. So those are the two things I would submit that I would like to see in a public defender organization, not necessarily PD's office, as it tries to meld with the managed counsel. We've got to get contracts, we've got to get relationships established in a traditional, fundamental, legal way, as everybody expects it to be. And I think that we might have misallocated the way that we look at funding caseloads, because we might really be upside down, funding too much for a few major felonies when we ought to be pumping more money at this bloated misdemeanor system.
And I'd like to add on to that. So when it comes to changes that would cost little or no money, that I think would make a big impact, you mentioned a little bit about having a higher standard, and the professor mentioned this as well. And I think in a letter from ACBLA to CAPDS, they mentioned their first recommendation is an overhaul of their oversight board that reviews the performance of their defense attorneys. Now, this is something that could happen now. It could have happened months ago.
Yeah. Should have been happened.
Right, and so when it comes to having some kind of oversight board, I believe that it should be something that's a little bit more independent, that can hold defense attorneys to a higher standard. Not to, does your client think that you're listening, but are you producing real outcomes, like better outcomes for your defendants?
How do you measure those things?
How many, your average jail sentence for defendants, maybe a dismissal rate, average maybe probation time, things like that. These are numbers you can find really online now. I've actually got a spreadsheet there. You can kind of see who these kind of defense attorneys are. And so you mentioned, you don't want to have a negative incentive for these kinds of attorneys, right? You don't want to punish them, or maybe you have a positive incentive. But I think it is okay to maybe take away the number of cases that very low performing attorneys have, so that they can have an opportunity to get training in order to provide it at a higher level. Because at the end of the day, it's a job. And if you don't do your job well, then you get fired.
That's right.
And so I think that a revamped oversight board for CAPDS, and we have a public defender office, the board I think should be reviewing both cases equally.
And this is a really important topic, and I'm butting in here, but
Please go ahead.
I would encourage you all to think more broadly about performance and outcome. I was really struck, maybe a year ago, Vinny Ciraldi and a couple of folks wrote an article, recidivism is not enough. We should be looking beyond whether or not somebody reoffends and look at things like quality of life. So, I mean, when we talk about outcomes, whether it's, avoiding pretrial detention, whether it's an acquittal, whether it's getting probation rather than incarceration, whatever, those are immediate outcomes. I think in terms of the performance of public defense, we should be looking more broadly into, securing employment, maintaining a household, going to school, improvements like that. I hate to use the H word. Holistic. But I don't know where you all are with this.
We all agree.
Well, okay, let's jump in the pool. What the hell?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
That's
We're not
what
talking about doing the bare minimum. We're talking about seeing a complete individual and
Absolutely.
recognizing
Bless you.
all of the traumas that came with that individual and everything that will come from that.
Absolutely. Because you know what? Nobody else is going to do it.
Agreed. Did everyone hear holistic? That's what we're going for. If you hear something less, it didn't come from us.
Yeah.
I do want to say one thing in response to all that, because I think all of that's really important, but we can recognize that those are ultimately sort of output-driven measures
Yeah.
A lot of public defenders' offices also have input-driven measures that could be put in place, right? Things that are standards that are checked, that are reports about how regularly you see your detained clients.
Sure.
Not
Things
just
of that
sign in
nature
on the
that
clipboard,
everybody,
but you
right, actually sitting
met with the
down,
client.
referrals that are made for other sorts of services. There's a whole list of things that regardless of how bad the case is, regardless of how difficult the circumstances were that you arrived at are, we can all do these things.
Right.
There's a whole set of measures that can be put in place that everyone can and should adhere to.
But it only really gets there through the institutional
Yes.
division, the institutional notion of the entity.
That's the difficulty of having something very decentralized.
Right, and that's what we find, and that's what the judges for years have been complaining about, is that in this decentralized managed managed assigned counsel, or prior to that, the wheel, was that there was no quality control of the dispensation or the delivery of the alternative holistic services that we could rely on to having really gotten to the people that it needs to get to. It was a onesie-twosie kind of thing, and nobody was checking to see what the comprehensive approach or what the comprehensive impacts were on the people. Until recently, we've suddenly gotten the attention, largely because of the grassroots organization's efforts. We've gotten that kind of scrutiny. We've got TIDC available to help us fund the right kind of organization. Getting it right-sized is also very important. Right-sized is important. That's why I talk a lot about adequate funding as opposed to fully or well-funded, which are all, I think, red herrings. But we have to get to the adequate funding, like Judge Earl says, find out what the top is, what can we do with that?
So, we'll have to say, we have time for one more question for this group, and we're going to open it up to everybody else. The question will be for Nick, our host, in just 1 second. But before I do that, a few quick plugs that tie together some of the things folks are talking about. Skip, you had some great points about that contract. Folks, if you look up, there are a lot of client bill of rights that are out there. They're really important tools. We talked about client communication. Look at tools like UpTrust. I mean, there are places where you can do two-way messaging between attorney and client all hours of the day. If
I don't know if you want that necessarily.
Well, the all hours part? Or
The all hours part.
One way.
Steve, they also mentioned, we're a little bit upside down on misdemeanors and felonies. There's a great publication from the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, NACDL, called Minor Crimes, Massive Ways, that deals exactly with that. When we're talking about performance measures and things like that, National Legal Aid Defender Association, we don't have Claire Buteau from our staff. She used to be there at NLADA, but she's not here this evening. They have a great publication on performance measures. So there are definitely tools out there. Jeff Adachi, we talked about earlier, he had great checklists that all the attorneys had to check all these boxes, making sure that they're doing the research. And they had specific ones for specific types of cases. So I would urge everybody in this room, and I think everybody's interested in public defense, seek out these tools, NAPD, NLADA, NACDL, there are a lot of tools out there. To tie a little bit of this together, before we open it up, the last question, Nick, is going to go to you. 5 years from now. So you're 3 now? 1 now. Oh, this guy's a 1 now. Oh my God. So nobody in the room can hire Nick for another couple of years. So just mark that down.
I've got an intern opportunity.
So
It doesn't involve money.
So Nick, in a couple of years you're going to be practicing. And we hope that you're around for all of our sake in Travis County. We'd love to have somebody like you practicing here. And along with, and Karen and other folks that we've talked to here, I mean, what you folks at UT are doing is amazing. We don't see this at a lot of law schools across the United States. So it's impressive. 5 years from now, you're out, you graduate, you've got, I don't know how much in student debt at this point. You're a public defender, hopefully the federal loan forgiveness still exists, you're practicing. And we have a public defender office. 1 in 5 years, does that public defender office look like?
I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to have a public defender office because there would be no cases really to work on. And that's like my hypothetical where we don't necessarily work on it. That it could all just be social services where all the money should be going. What I would want in a public defender office, I think the professor mentioned it a lot, of the values that I would be looking for in the kind of culture that is developed after 5 years of a public defender office. That is about doing everything you can for your client's interest, keeping them back with their families and in their jobs, And I imagine, if I'm gonna, what I would really want is a really great training program for young UT students, right? I may be one out now, but there's going to be generations of one Ls after me who are going to want to practice public defense. And when they get out, I mean, a lot of the conversations I hear from 3Ls that are graduating now is when they're picking their office, or when they're picking where they want to do their summers, one of the biggest considerations is training for young attorneys when they come into an office. And that's a huge gap that you can't really find if you have a managed assigned system that is totally decentralized.
Right.
And you have an institution that not just has a weekend seminar for, they have someone come in to teach one class on a very specific topic, but training for months, like when you graduate to when you start to take cases, training in the culture as well as best practices. So that's what I'm really would be most excited about and jazzed about for having a public defender office for 5 years.
So quick plug, TIDC, we recently started a statewide, very small scale mentoring program. 25 mentees, 25 mentors, all of them go through Gideon's Promise, which is kind of the elite training programs for public defender office. We're hoping to expand that in future years. It really started, we have to give credit to Alex Bunham, the chief PD down in Harris County. We really kind of kicked that off, so we're kind of standing on his shoulders. Dr. Bill Kelly, can you believe this guy's a 1L?
You know, I think it's just wrong.
I was not so bright and articulate as a 1L. That's impressive. All right, we're going to open up to everybody here. A couple of ground rules. One, try to keep the diatribe short. If you're going to speechify a little bit, try to keep it relatively short and try to ask a question at the end of it for somebody up here if you can. At some point, we may have to cut you off. We only have an hour together, and there's a lot of ground to cover. Rule number 2, please be respectful. If you're not, Professor Katie Dyer will escort you out of here, and she's pretty tough, so you don't miss that. So let's open it up to everybody in the room. What all kind of questions do you have? Yes, ma'am.
So let's touch upon a little bit, but one of the biggest problems for people who are even arrested, much not less like convicted, is their criminal record. It's what makes it really difficult for them to find higher paying jobs and to, not go back into the criminal justice system. And I guess what would a PD office or what would the current system do to advocate in the legislature to keep the criminal records away from private hands? Because I didn't do a deeper research on this, but I haven't seen any substantive research that says that hiring somebody who has a felony or misdemeanor means for the private individual that they're gonna steal or do the same thing. If they are paid adequately, I think it would be the opposite effect. But I guess overall, what would the public defender office do on that?
That's a great question. So one thing, I mean, we had an idea the other day, and I went over to the rest of our panel, but we talked about, that nationally, in just the past 5-6 years, folks have started celebrating Gideon Day. Some places they call it Public Defender Day, but it's the day Gideon versus Wainwright was decided in 1963. I think we talked about what can we do in the legislature to advocate on Gideon Day in future years. And that's I think ties into your question, but to your specific question about how do you address that problem that's following you around? Folks in the group, what do you think?
I think one place to start is with the legislature. There are over 100 occupations in Texas for which someone with a felony record cannot be licensed or certified. That's absolutely ridiculous as a wholesale policy. Case by case, perhaps. But one thing is to sort of take the fright out of hiring a felon. The other thing is ban the box. I don't know what the status of that is in Texas. What did I mean? Working in the city. Okay, well.
Trying to take it away.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The bills are passed the Senate.
Yeah, on its way to being.
But it's a huge issue. I mean, employment produces recidivism between 10 and 20 percentage points. I mean, that's a no-brainer. But we continue to make it extraordinarily difficult for people with criminal records to find gainful employment. It's one of the most critical issues.
Let me add to that because I am directly impacted. And I have been out, in August will be 14 years. And my criminal record still affects me. I have one offense on my criminal record. I've held a good job. And when management changed, I lost that job because of my criminal background. And I had worked my way up. So when you say what the defense bar can do about it, society has to get on the bandwagon, not just the defense, the private attorney, public defender, whoever. society has to get on board with that because by law, I've done my time. I've served it, I'm done. I did what the judge told me I had to do as far as my sentence. I've completed successfully and was released early off of parole. But yet society will not allow us to move on. And we have to continue to fight that over and over, not only with employment, but also with housing. You know, you look on the application and my conviction may not have anything to do with me paying my bills, with me paying my rent every month. However, in certain apartment complexes, I'm barred out from that because of my criminal background. So it's more than just the defense bar doing something about it. This society as a whole needs to jump on the bandwagon and accept the fact that we are human. You probably cook brownies with your neighbor and don't even know your neighbor has a criminal background, but when you find out, are you going to disassociate yourself with that person? No, you want to continue to be that person's friend because you got to know that person. So society is more than that. Society needs to change the way they view about people with criminal backgrounds.
Can I talk about again, the institutional aspect to try to address your question? Right now, the system that we have is a series of individuals who are contracted with a board of people who divvy up cases to be handled. Under the current system, and the current operating procedures, the lawyers are restricted to just handling those transactions for which they've been assigned in the courtroom. The things that you're talking about are outside the courtroom. They're in addition to what happens in court. So you're asking about expunctions, and now we have these things called motions to seal the record of the deferred adjudication and these other things. And those are kind of extra effort. Now, the assigned counsel, he wants to get paid for everything. He's not willing to do work for free necessarily, unless there's an incentive to him. And right now, the judges, through the way that we've written our current indigent defense plan, omit the assigned counsel from engaging even that client for trying to get them to hire us to do an expunction or a motion to seal and those kinds of things. Now, Ms. Dyer will point out that we've got here, and Kate will point out, we've already got here in the university an expunction clinic.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful machine. It's wonderful. It doesn't apply to everybody. That's a different question still, but to the question I think you're asking, and you're right about the societal thing, but to the question you're asking, the public defender's office, again, provides the umbrella that we're talking about in the grassroots organizations, where we can find all of these entities and social outlets, resources, under one roof, instead of telling somebody to go over there, get on a bus and traverse their way there, which sometimes is extraordinary, or take your non-driver's license owning self and take the chance to drive across town, and if you get busted, get another charge. So the PD's office actually serves as an umbrella under which we can bring all of these resources for a one-stop shop to help people who just don't have the means. I got the means, I can get across town, but I got cousins who can't. So I think to answer that, I think the public defender's office, again, is adequately and probably best suited to deliver exactly what you're talking about, to help reduce the impacts of those minor indiscretions. And again, I talk mostly about misdemeanors because that's the greatest density of the discretions that affect people in the greatest way. And put them in places where we can get to the social worker right away, who can get to the MAPS people right away. I really do think that the best delivery vehicle is the public defender's office, because the Matters Council's system just shows that it's too disparate, it's too individual oriented to coalesce and put those resources together. Although we've tried.
I'd like to build off your question and just direct something to Chris Harris real quick. And Chris, after you answer, I want to open this up and get another question out here. Because I love your question, and it's, what do you do when you're out there? You have this record, and what does a public defender even have in this? And relating to Dr. Kelly, what you said about the box. So, Chris Harris, you work in the legislature. I assume you were there today?
Uh-huh.
You were there yesterday?
That's why I'm just like this. I don't know you just
Were you there the day before that?
I was.
How many times have you been there past midnight this session so far?
A handful, yeah.
Handful, okay. So this guy has been in the legislature a lot. Right? Yeah. You people are working very hard out there.
Yeah.
When we look at ban the box, for instance, what's the holdup? I mean, this is the second time in history that Republicans and Democrats have actually agreed on something criminal justice-wise. We were all tough on crime back in the 90s, 94 crime bill. Now, here we are agreeing we should reform this, right? We have Koch brothers, we have Right on Crime all saying ban the box. We have ACLU saying ban the box. Why can't we get it together? Why haven't we banned the box? What can we do in the legislature? And what do public defenders have to do with it?
Oh, wow, great question. Well, I will say that, we currently we have a fair chance hiring ordinance. Some people here and definitely grassroots leadership and other local organizations were instrumental in getting that done here locally. And it actually goes a step beyond being a box in that it prevents an employer from running a background check before they've made an offer of employment. So not just, I don't have to check a box, I also don't have to be subjected to a background check until you've interviewed me, until you've met me, until you've known me, and then you have an opportunity to offer me employment. And at that point, you're able to run a background check and still decide if you'd like to move forward. And this is, I think, a type of reform that really pushes the ball forward and that it actually forces people to interact with people that they might have literally just seen their app and thrown it out. And to continue to actually interview and meet with people. But our franchise hiring ordinance, unfortunately, does not have bipartisan support. And each year each legislative session is under attack. Particularly from certain parts of the business community who believe that, particularly because it is localized, it represents some big imposition on them to have such rules for here. So it's definitely something that we need to continue to build on around the state. And again, I do think that, as I mentioned earlier, a public defender can be a really important advocate as it relates to things like this, right? Because that institution is going to understand what's impacting its clients, not just from the lawyers that work there, but from the social workers and everyone else that's employed there, right? And be in a position to really advocate strongly for not just incremental reforms, but the type of big changes that are really going to make a difference in people's lives. And also to push for, like Skip was saying, to push for expunctions during the process, right? Not to say, okay, I'm done with you now, your case is dismissed, but to keep with that client and to keep pushing for those extra steps and advocating for things at the ledge or locally that automatically expunge certain types of criminal records, automatically seal certain types of records, right? We have to be thinking about those types of changes as well from a policy perspective. And again, a public defender is going to be well situated to help make that sort of case on behalf of his clients. The other thing that a public defender is going to do is keep more records from piling up, right? I mean, I think good lawyers in general will help that, but a public defender most definitely will say, actually get more cases dismissed, is what the research shows, keep sentences lengths shorter, do things that ultimately keep people from having, more and more of those sort of consequences. Also, be helping folks out, even as they go through the probation and parole processes. You talk about recidivism. One of the biggest drivers of bed days in the jail is that probation revocation, right? And we're talking locally. And so who's helping folks through that process, right? Who's really staying in touch with people over the course of their interaction with the criminal justice system? So these are all things that I believe the public defender is in a position at minimum to help really affect and impact.
I love that you tied it back to the Peruvian position. Was that the answer to the Peruvian position of systems and institutions? I saw hands up here. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so one thing that's kind of permeated this conversation is the idea of culture out of public defender's office. And this might not be the best forum, but it seems like more broadly in Austin there is a debate about the existence of public defender's office in general. We're really fortunate that we're living in this era where people are going to law school to be public defenders.
Yes.
And that, this isn't about a paycheck, it's about a philosophy.
That's right.
We get a round of applause.
I'm a 3L, I'm graduating, I'm going to Colorado Public Defender, and we have 10 students graduating this year going to public defenders out of state who most of us would love to have been able to stay here.
So you're our brain drain.
Yes. And I'm just curious, without a public defender's office, how do we as a city expect to retain people who want to be defense attorneys because they care about dismantling the carceral state, not just because it was an option out of law school. And I don't know how without that apparatus we keep the best lawyers in this city.
Pam?
I think that's a question for Judge.
We have two other judges out there too, that's up there. And, I think that, thank you. And I wish that I wish that you didn't have to go to Colorado, honestly. But my friend lives up there, so I may have her look you up, because she's doing this type of thing up there. But I think to get to be where there's a place you can, I guess, I don't know how to answer that question, I feel like I'm on the spot here.
You can tag me in at some point.
Tagging you in.
All right, so thoughts on that, and then I'm going to come back to
I'm done tagging him in.
what we see, and we've seen this nationwide, you know, when you go to a public defender office, you know, and you tell me if this rings true as a student, right? You can go hang a shingle. What are your reasons for not hanging a shingle?
I mean, especially straight out of law school, I want the institutional support of having training and having mentors, and I feel like it's just hard to hang your own shingle and find that. Especially when I have clients who are all indigent, I want to be able to have access to social workers and immigration attorneys.
So when you know we see this nationally. I mean that when you graduate law school and especially now that folks have so much debt that past generations of lawyers didn't have, not in the same degree. And you get out there, you can get federal loan forgiveness in a lot of places. Some places have loan forgiveness specifically for their public defender office and statewide programs. You get mentorship, you get brief sharing, you get direct supervision, so you're not screwing up a case. I don't know, I mean, I think even, I'm going to go on a limb here, I would say even if, once you graduate law school, you don't just graduate knowing how to practice law. We don't have residencies like you do in medicine. And so I think that institutional support is key. I think it's a fantastic question. I'm going to tag you back in there.
My tagging back in means that, I mean, I look at these lawyers in the in the classroom here, in the lecture hall, and they're great lawyers. And we do have mentorships that we do wonderful in Travis County. I have to say that I see lawyers that are up here that have, yes, sir.
Well, you can finish.
But I think that having the institutional aspect of it is extremely important. Because then, and when you talk about the institutional part of it, it's the relationships that you build on. It's relationships with your colleagues. It's the relationship of, I mean, as a prosecutor, you can go down the hall and you can knock on the door and ask somebody for the help, right? As in the defense bar community, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you're kind of out there on your own, and you have your support system, but you don't have the next door office to help you out.
Well, I was going to say that I got my bar result on a Friday. I went to court administration on Monday. I had my first client on Tuesday. Okay? You can go down there and you network with people. You go out to lunch with lawyers. You go to the CLEs. You meet as many people as you can. You ask questions. That's how you do it. And there's a young lady right now that has been practicing 2 years down at the courthouse who has a Court of Appeals opinion published. She's sat in on some very big trials. She's a rising star, and she's doing it because she has the initiative and the desire to do that. So I'm not the only one I've never worked for a prosecutor. I've never been in any institution but my own office. And it's possible, and I'm not the only one. So if you want to do it, you can do it. You got all the resources out there and all the ability to do it.
So let me bounce that back to the law student. So ma'am, so you hear this from the judge? And Judge, I don't mean to put you on the spot too much. Oh, you're not, I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on. Who's it back? Oh, okay, sorry. I totally missed you. And I think it is me because I don't have my glasses. But, so ma'am, why is it not attractive to you as somebody who's going to graduate in practice?
I mean, I know people have tried that route in Austin, and most of them don't last very long because the culture is not great. And I've done internships in other cities and other states in public defense, and the culture there is just so much better. The culture in the courthouse is better. I mean, you go into a courthouse in Travis County, you can't tell who the defense bar is and who the prosecutors are. You see people going up to the bench without a defense attorney, and that's not the kind of culture I want to work in, and it's not the kind of culture that I can change as a student straight out of law school. I might myself be able to be a successful attorney, but I'm not interested in just being a successful attorney. I'm interested in working in a city where the whole city is invested in indigent defense and representing and recognizing that you know, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but,
Annette.
and as Annette was pointing out, though, like the minute you enter the system, you're labeled as an other, you're labeled as a criminal, and I want to work in a courthouse where that is not the prevailing attitude, but unfortunately that's the attitude I currently see. And I'm interested in being in an office with people who believe as much as I do, as much as my classmates do, in dismantling this whole system instead of just, you know, going to work and then coming home.
And do I see, I just put my glasses on, are you wearing an orange, can you stand up and you might see your shirt because
yeah, I worked in New Orleans last summer.
Wow. So, and we recently started a chief public defender group in Texas, and our first guest speaker actually was Derwin Bunner.
Yeah.
And the second guest speaker this summer is going to be Doug Wilson, actually, the recently retired chief public defender in Colorado. So that's, yeah, so that's interesting. Sir, you've been so patient. Thank you for your
Oh, yeah, and I have a question I would like to ask. However, you are wearing your glasses, and I believe that the individual, that she had a question, and it would be disrespectful to put my question first.
Yeah, go for it.
I think coming from a teacher's perspective, where I think we really see that mass incarceration starts at birth, I guess my question is, if language is how we make meaning, how can we make sense of a problem if we continue to use language like indigent and not indentured? Because I think this somehow implies in our brains like a cognitive process where that people are just poor and not that people are victims of a system of indentured servitude, and we are stratified by class at birth, and like somehow, like, and where mass incarceration mostly serves as a system of criminalized dissent or rebellion. And if we look at it as that, as mass incarceration in the school to prison pipeline is more of a system of criminalizing dissent and criminalizing those who don't fit a mold for labor. If we continue to use terms like indigent, I think that is the base problem of like holistic change. Because if we think people are just indigent, then that somehow implies that they don't deserve holistic change. But if we really acknowledge that this is a system of indentured servitude, maybe then some lawyers can start to disrupt the tax system, right? And not just serve and disrupt that institution. But how can we continue to use this word? Because I feel like it creates a cognitive gap, a cognitive dissonance, where we don't have to acknowledge that we have created a system that is indentured servitude. It is, it absolutely is, and there's no way to get around that. And so why aren't we using indentured?
So I want to open this up to everybody here. First, I want to put in a little bit of plug. I am so glad you asked that question. I wrote an article, personal plug, about 3 or 4 years ago.
A shameless personal plug.
A shameless personal plug for an outdated article that nobody will read. For Criminal Justice Magazine a few years back, called Welcome to Public Defense. And why we should say public, and I say this as the director of the Texas Indigent Defense Commission, and I get that. But I give 3 reasons that we shouldn't say indigent. 1, Gideon doesn't say indigent. In fact, it overruled a case that used the phrase indigent. Gideon doesn't use that phrase, and in fact, his progeny. You look at Argerson, or you look at Douglas. None of those cases use indigent. They said if you can't afford counsel.
That's right.
I'm not indigent, but if I get hauled in for a death penalty case, all of a sudden I can't afford counsel. There's a big difference there. Number 2, the reason that you brought up, which I think is a brilliant reason, that there's an otherization. There's a sense of almost like charity as opposed to helping out just another human being. There is an otherization built into that phrase, indigent. And the 3rd reason, because when I say indigent a lot, especially if I have a cold, I have a very hard time saying that. So there's 3 good reasons to move away from that term. And I think that the student law group, I would urge you to move toward public defense too. I think it's a great question. Panelists, what do you think?
I agree. I think, if you look at the proposal that the working group has put forward, I don't know that the word indigent is in it. There's other language used to describe people that can't afford counsel.
What is about the use of language, though?
I mean, I think that it's really important. I think in the realm of teaching, whenever I was a former teacher as well, and whenever folks used to use the word underserved communities, and I was like, they're not underserved, they're historically looted. Like, this is on purpose. This isn't just, and I think whenever we insert names, it actually makes us feel better about ourselves than it does anything else. And I'm putting myself in there, and mostly like white, nice liberals, it makes you feel better about yourself in terms of what we're talking about. So I am all about accessibility of language, people being able to understand. Like, whenever I look at all of those court documents, what does that even say? What are you even saying to people? And it doesn't help that you read them out loud. You're still using language that is inaccessible, non-comprehensible, and part of it made up. Like, let's just describe what we're describing and what's happening here. So I'm in complete support of all of those things.
So I just want to say that the student group, the Indigent Defense Group, is now accepting recommendations for new pages.
That's a dang good question.
Yeah, I'll just very quickly say that I 100% support the power of language and support moving away from that. I mean, really just using people-centered language in all contexts. I really have a big problem with the word defendant, the word inmate, the word prisoner, all the different labels that this system puts on people all throughout each step of the process. At every step, they're a person facing a certain situation created by the system. And so I really would encourage us all, and I definitely can fall into that habit or back on some of those institutional words. And so I want everyone to check me on it, and I definitely believe that we should strive to use people-centered language in all contexts where, especially if you don't choose that situation that you're in, the situation is thrust upon you.
You're here.
And we're lawyers, after all. Language is what we're all about, right? We're talking about conceptualization, selection of language in order to get the conceptualization absolutely crystal clear to communicate exactly what the ideals and values are that we're trying to advance. I wanted to kind of, it's not Mr. Lauman up there described how simple it might be to transition from law school into hanging your shingle. It is easy to hang a shingle, it just takes one day. Mr. Lauman and I both come from storied histories where he was a school teacher and had, I think, a long history as a school teacher, and I retired as an Army officer. So it was easier for us as independents with experience, significant experience in the public realm, to interact and engage the system with the confidence that a young lawyer doesn't have when they come right out of law school having just passed the ball. Many of the younger lawyers in our culture here who have succeeded, my good friend Paul Quinley was my classmate, they were lucky enough to come under the wing of somebody who had the space and the money to help promote them and give them at least a platform, some wind under their wings. ACDLA puts on a wonderful set of CLE weekly and monthly to help promote some of the pedagogic things we need to know as lawyers. And then there's TCDLA, which is an outstanding organization, again, for the promotion of the pedagogy of lawyering and those kinds of things. So it is kind of accessible, but it's daunting unless you're fearless.
I'll also say it's remarkably difficult when you're graduating with $180,000 in debt to find a way to open your own practice.
You have been, sir, you've been so patient, remarkably so. Go ahead.
So, and you referenced Jeff Adachi earlier, and for those who aren't aware, one of the big things about Jeff Adachi as an elected public defender was that he was also an advocate. And he was an advocate for particularly for community oversight policing. He was a watchdog. And when asked about that, he often described it as it was a natural extension of his role, because how can he perform his full duty if he wasn't worried about the situations that led to individuals coming into his care. So what I haven't heard in these discussions about the public defender's office or the establishment there is the need for advocacy from the office. And so I would like to ask the panel to speak on areas of necessary advocacy, because as you said earlier, when you posed the question to Chris, why is the PDO necessary? Why not so if we're saying this, we're talking about holistic principles, that H word, the public defender's office in and of itself, without any advocacy from it on behalf of dirty word reform, but that's the only word that change, whatever you want to call it, is going to be a necessarily uphill battle. So I would like to ask the panel what aspects of advocacy or what issues need to be advocated by the public defender's office in order for it to fulfill its duties.
Panel?
I think the overriding focus of a public defender is problem solving and everything that means. And that does involve advocacy. I think it's up to the public defender to fix all the things that led to this person in front of you being here today, for this defendant. I mean, who else is going to advocate for that individual? Prosecutor ain't. The judge ain't. It's up, I mean, I don't know who else is going to play that role. And I think it's a role that is an uphill battle. But I think, again, that is a starting point for fundamental change.
I mean, where do I start?
Bail reform, drug decriminalization.
Yeah, I think there's lots of places where a public defender can do advocacy in the community, and I think Austin would be really lucky because when the legislative session happens, crazy things pop up all the time, and this community has the opportunity to go up there and say something and speak on behalf of experiences. And so having the institutional brainstorm, thought process, and an ability to say, hey, Supervisor X, I'm gonna take the cases today, get up to the ledge, we're talking about bail reform today, go now, go, talk about our experiences. I think there's a real opportunity there to focus on certainly bail reform, but I think that also involves working with the relevant agencies in town about jail beds, about how quickly people get brought to court, about who gets brought to court, making bond applications a mandatory thing, doing bond reviews with judges. I think there's tons of prioritizing. I do hesitate to say that public defenders can solve the problems of all the problems our clients have that brought them to the system, because we don't invest in our support systems and our resources in a way that promotes longevity of success for people. So if you get them out of the system and you hook them into some resources, and I think that can help a lot of people, but that can't be it. We have to invest in these other systems to have long-term benefits for our clients. Removing some of these barriers is really important. Removing barriers to housing, removing barriers to employment. I think a public defender's office can do a lot for that. But I will say, as a public defender, I can't go get my client housing.
No,
if they're
we weren't talking about money. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of money that needs to be spent to really fundamentally change this system. We need to have public health in place. We need to have affordable housing. We need to have access to employment. All these criminogenic circumstances that are the reasons that people end up in the criminal justice system. Yeah, there's a huge amount of investment in Travis County. I mean, this is one of the most liberal counties in the whole damn state. And
a conservative state.
Yeah, you got a conservative state, and we are painfully, embarrassingly short of things like affordable housing, for Christ's sake.
But do you think that, does anybody here really think that the adequate delivery system for social services is a lawyer's office?
No, and let me jump in. So that's mischaracterization of what I laid out. But the reason I'm saying that is, when I asked a question about issues that would deserve such require the advocacy of the public defender's office, I think Katie made a very good point of identifying issues by pointing out issues that if you address the criminogenic issues, or even immediate issues that plague someone in the criminal justice involvement, that you still have these other issues that are more root issues or that feed more into the situation. And those themselves, you've identified issues that I think require addressing and advocacy.
Absolutely.
So as far as resource delivery, no. But for instance, let's not play.
But marshalling maybe.
But when we talk about county resources, we talk to the county commissioner's court, and we talk to the county courts, we talk to the judges, and we talk to the DA's office, because even if it's tangentially related to their wheelhouse, we want them to sign on board. So with the establishment of a PDO's office, I feel I'm asking what issues with the PDO's office, with the establishment of a PDO, what issues would the PDO need to advocate and say, hey, we're standing up for this because this directly impacts the communities that we serve.
Let me see if I can talk about it a little, because I think the point y'all are making about the lack of public health, social services, affordable housing, those are real, and I don't want to dismiss or downplay them. But the money for those things, in addition to being in the bank accounts of the wealthier members of our community who are paying their fair share, is also in the police department, it's in the sheriff's department, it's at the jail, right? that's where the money is. And so what a public defender and what all advocates can do is really work and advocate to divest from those systems, right? To diminish overall what the mission of those organizations is, such that the money can be reinvested into the community. So that's one, and I think that's the most important thing. I would say secondarily, if you go to the Capitol, everyone has an interest, right, that's represented up there, except for people accused of criminal activity. The people accused of criminal activity have no advocates there. That's why I'm going to throw out a rough estimate, and Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong. 2/3 of the bills that you see are enhancements, right? So we talk a lot about the low-hanging fruit in criminal justice, and there's a lot of it as far as small things that are driving people into the system really unfairly. But ultimately, we do have to address violence, right, and more serious issues in order to really roll back mass incarceration. And the first step is to get folks to stop enhancing crimes, to layer on more and more punishment on people, because they really just have no advocates at the Capitol, aside from a few criminal justice reform groups. And a couple of public defenders that you see, like Alex, like Michael, that show up there, but they're pale in comparison to the prosecutors that you see, TCDAs in every committee, advocating for everything. Those are the folks that are there, the sheriffs, the police. So we need advocates there representing people accused of crimes, at minimum to halt what's going on up there, but ultimately we need to be rolling back our punitive system and seeing that we have to address violence in a different way.
Maybe what we're talking about is something that doesn't quite exist yet. The question of who's responsible for addressing these issues. Criminal justice reform is not just about changing the criminal justice system, it's about changing a variety of other institutions as well. At the end of the day, it seems to me that whether it's a public defender or someone in the public defender's arena, who else is going to do this? Who else is going to come? Criminal justice involvement is an potential intercept point for social services. I don't think the prosecutor is going to be the first person in line to do that. I think whether we reinvent the role of the public defender or invent a new role within the auspices of defense counsel to serve that role. I don't have the answer for that, but I don't know who else is going to be doing these things.
Well, is it the delivery system or is it the delivery system?
Press pause real quick, so I want to get back to some other questions real quick. We should go on about this for a while. But we actually have the director of Texas Defender Services with us, Amanda Marzulo, speaking at Educate. Amanda, do you have a comment, question, or go for it?
I was actually going, Chris ended up saying exactly what I was going to point out is that every single prosecutor office of a major metropolitan area has a representative at the legislature advocating for reform that's favorable to prosecution on a regular basis. And I'm one of the only defense attorneys in the state that shows up there. And I'm constantly being pressed because there is no stakeholder in Austin that shows up and advocates for people who are accused of criminal activity. So just creating a stakeholder group in Austin would be a tremendous contribution to our justice system.
I saw a hand over here, but I saw Nick over here. Yeah, for it.
No, Dr. Kelly, I have to disagree with you on the prosecutor thing. I think we're seeing in Dallas the beginnings of a change in the role.
Absolutely.
And just to reinforce what Amanda was saying, we've seen DA Clouseau, his staff are testifying in favor of bills that would ban incarceration for technical limitations, things that would make a significant difference. So I think, all I want to say is I think that it's up to us to demand from the county attorney candidates, from district attorney candidates, and I don't think DA Clouseau's gone far enough on even drug stuff, because people with drug addictions don't belong in prison, they belong in treatment. All I'm saying is I think that there is an opportunity. In your book, you make this point. To have a greater role in.
No, I fundamentally believe in prosecutorial reform. I don't think it's the only answer.
Right. Can I just say, I just want to say that going and getting the prosecutors to be on our side sounds like a nice long Hail Mary later on. But if we, I think where I've been struggling a lot, and some of us on behalf of working as advocates for the community, is like if we can't even get our own people that are supposed to be on our side in line with us, then like that is so many years from now. I'm trying to understand why we can't all get on the same page, why this group to exist for Texas and just speak on behalf of people at our capital, why that doesn't exist. That sounds like it's something that can happen for free. That sounds like it doesn't take any money, but it is, that has to exist within you, that to do that. And you know what, so whenever we're talking about the difference between a PDO and a MAC, yeah, I have a lot of hesitations because it does, that has to exist within you. This idea to take this down has to be within you. And I don't, just based on my experience of who I've interacted with and the things that I've been called or said throughout this whole process, I don't feel like that's what is here in this community. So I'm really, really nervous about how this continues on. And I want to say that we, a good chunk of people right here within my arm's distance, fought really hard last year towards the city of Austin because of how many folks the police department was putting into the jail for low-level offenses. I can't even imagine. Their heads would have exploded if the private defense bar were there with us, advocating for the same things. There's a million different places that we need the extra step, the extra level. And again, I do believe that that has to exist within you. I don't know if you can teach that. I don't know if you can cultivate that. It kind of exists. So I'm very nervous of that going forward. But I just wanted to highlight whenever we're talking about the prosecutors and where that is, we're stuck in the mud trying to get all of our folks that are supposed to be on our side, quote unquote, right in line there. So
I hand over here and then up here after that. Yes, ma'am.
Well, there's a lot of things my brain is trying to do, but one of the things is that, you know, a lot of these, you were talking about the enhancements, and you talked about, you know, there are things, the Driver Responsibility Act, there is, you know, to get an occupational driver's license, you have to get an attorney. But the thing is so many things are laws, and the thing is if we can't get people to go out and vote, the prosecutor is elected, judges are elected, Texas legislators are elected. In Travis County, we're lucky. We've got it. It's been around the state, but so we can all go to the, I worked at the Capitol, we can all go to the Capitol and just have people go and just talk about how awful everything is. But if people around the state do not go out and vote, we're going to be stuck with who we get. And then we've had bills that were passed by the House and the Senate that were helping things, and then you have a governor who vetoes it because he doesn't want to look easy on crime. And it's like, you want to go like crazy. But we do. We all have to go out and vote because there are these terrible laws that we should be able to get rid of. Things should be misdemeanor, sure, things should be just off the books.
yeah, I just want to remind you again, like that is great, and I'm sure there are plenty of people working towards that, but whenever we're talking about people with criminal convictions, that availability is like stripped away. People are undocumented, stripped away. So there's more left for us to do. There's more left for folks with that criteria to do, and what it has been is pushed. It is by force. The DA that is there, I'm sure it wasn't just a happy glide in to be able to be in that seat. Like that takes effort. That takes everyone together to push more, for more, because we demand more.
Sir, you had a question, way in the back first.
Well, a couple of things. The first is, I think my concern that people are familiar with what the local defense bar is doing to advocate for some of these issues. And I think a lot of the diversion courts that we now have are the product of a joint work group with local defense bar judges, prosecutors, the drug diversion courts, the DWI courts. There's a large number of courts that attempt to divert convictions for individuals who have been accused of a crime. And I don't know if the individuals in ILS or in the work group actually understand all of the work that is going to try and create those opportunities, but that does divert you from having a conviction. My other question was from Ms. Dyer, and I think she spoke a lot about the culture of a public defender's office. And my question is, for the students here in this room seeking to obtain sort of criminal defense or just defense-oriented understanding through internships and programs, whether or not interning in a prosecutor's office would be consistent with later on pursuing a job in a public defender's office.
Well, why not? You know, David Comey's got that great advertisement out there. That was, hey, I used to be an insurance prosecutor, you know, whatever. So he knows how to sneak up on him. You've got to kind of sometimes know how to do it. It's a place too.
Professor Dyer, do you want to weigh in, or we can tag in Nick? It seems David wanted to weigh in.
I think that generally if somebody wants to be a defense attorney and wants to be a public defender, I encourage students to explore different offices to figure out what their philosophy is as a defense attorney. I think there's different skill sets for prosecutors and defense attorneys. I think there are skill sets that overlap. I think there are a lot of different skill sets, and I think there's a lot of philosophy development. I think a lot of the students that I encounter, not all, but would have qualms or would be hesitant to advocate for somebody to be incarcerated, and that's what working in a prosecutor's office at the end of the day entails. So I don't know how to answer your question except for that I know that UT provides a lot of different opportunities to hone skills and to learn what being a defense lawyer is. And for folks that know they want to be public defenders or know that they want to be defense attorneys, typically they go and do their summer internships in public defender offices around this country.
Professor Roberts?
I'll chime in on this. Everyone is different, and everybody comes with this profession from a different path. And there are many people who think that they can advocate for either side, and for those people who feel that way, more power to them. I came from a place where I could not imagine standing up and arguing that another person should be locked in a cage. That was where I came from. There was not one moment of my life where I felt it was consistent with who I was. Again, that is not meant to cast any judgment on anyone else who's coming at that profession from a different angle. But for me personally, it was completely inconsistent with who I was. It is completely inconsistent with who I am. It is inconsistent with who I will be for the rest of my life. And so to tell a young person that this is the path that they should take, I have a problem with it. Secondarily, as a simple, practical matter, people need to understand that there are offices all over this country that if you go down that path, you are down that path. Places all over New York, all over D.C., all over Philadelphia, all Colorado, New Orleans. I mean, we can go down the list of the offices that people that are in this institution want to apply to because they're the top public defender's offices in the country. The vast majority of those offices are not going to consider somebody with that experience. You can call them narrow-minded if you want to. I worked in a Durham public defender office. The advocate I spoke of earlier had been a prosecutor, so I know that it is entirely possible for somebody to be an amazing public defender after having been a prosecutor. But there is a practical standpoint of getting a job. And for people who truly want to be public defenders, and if you think you know where you're going, I joke all the time, my wife never thought she would be here in Texas. So, I think people should follow the things that they believe they should follow if they have strong convictions about this thing.
We have a prosecutor in the...
So I'm Madeline in 2L. So I think Chris and Katie made really good points. I have the benefit of not being a faculty member, so I don't have to give quite as PG-rated answers. I absolutely do not think that in order to be a good public defender, you either need experience in the prosecutor's office, or even so, I don't think that should be encouraged. So I can speak, as a 2L, I'm currently in the criminal defense clinic. I spent last summer in New Orleans in the juvenile public defender's office there. I'll be in Seattle this coming summer. Places like Seattle, Colorado, Alaska, they certify your second summer. So we get ample experience, talking to prosecutors in the courtroom, in the clinic. I'm in and out of the court multiple times a week. I have conservative family members who will make the argument, well, Madeline, don't you think that you'll be a better advocate for your client if you're working inside the prosecutor's office and understanding how they're working and thinking. I get that from my time with them in court. And so now I feel like I'm yelling at you and I don't mean to. I just feel really, really passionately about this. And so at least speaking from the student perspective, I would say that not recommended and honestly not discouraged. like Chris was saying, it closes a lot of avenues that serve more progressive offices.
So we've got time for one more question. Oh, you've been raising your hand, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So to kind of the point that was made about advocacy that the private bar has done, that is wonderful, but I think it could be more effective if we had a group of people that was centralized as opposed to individuals. It's a lot, part of the work is not just doing the work, but it's also having the organization and having the infrastructure to do that. And we can accomplish more together than we can as individuals. We don't solve our social problems through individual action, we solve them through collective action, and that's how we've implemented major social changes throughout our country's history. My question is, I support the Public Defender's Office, the proposal, because when I've been reviewing statistics, I found that there are generally lower conviction rates and lower sentences for clients who are represented by public defenders. And I think if we were to look at money, it's arguable that it may save the county money, because although we might be paying more on the defense side, we'll be paying less money to keep people in cages who don't need to be there and wouldn't be there if they had the best representation that they could have. But even with the Public Defender's Office, that would only handle, at most I understand, 30% of the cases. Prior to coming to law school, I worked with individuals who are being released from prison. And as long as the sentences for a criminal conviction, the collateral consequences can last an individual's entire life. And not having employment, not having housing are some of the most detrimental consequences. So with the fact that a MAC and individual attorneys will be taking 70 to 100% of cases, how can we implement and maintain a system where they can provide good service to their clients and empower them with information about how criminal conviction will impact their lives when they're negotiating plea deals and discussing it with their clients?
So that's a great, the first part of your question, you touched upon research. Do you know Miss Amanda Rube, the director here?
We haven't met.
You haven't met. It sounds like you wrote a, like, you did not write that because it's not like a plan or anything. The research, okay. Because the research question just sounds like it's just custom made for review. So let me hand it over to you first, and then maybe we'll get to that second part of your question.
Can you clarify the 30% though? That seems to be a talking point, and I just want to name that 30% was where the working group felt comfortable the growth would happen in the amount of 4 years. Taking on 100% in 4 years felt like we were setting the office up for disaster. So it is not stopping at 30%. We will continue to be there to take on more and more as it continues to grow and expand. I just want to name that because it seems to be a good talking point for why it shouldn't exist. And I just want to say that it's, whenever you're thinking about growing an office that big and that wide, we want to make sure it's done with intentionality.
Amanda?
Sure. I mean, I actually don't think I have that much to add because you kind of took all my talking points on that. But since the beginning of this process, I've said over and over again that I hope that we would be led and grounded in research and the values that we want to instill in our public defense system here. And when I talk about the research, I think today I sent the judiciary, I think 7 or 8 different studies which document public defenders having improved outcomes over appointed counsel and actually on par with retained counsel when it comes to conviction rates, sentence length, amount of time held pre-trial, and there are probably a handful of other kind of measurements that I think other people in the room would be able to speak to.
Like your Jesse Tylers. And
yeah. So I think you're absolutely right, and I think I'm proud that that has helped lead us to this moment, I think, in thinking about what an office should look like and why we have that need in this moment.
Anything anybody wants to add to that? Okay. We have actually probably time for one maybe shortest comment or question. Ma'am, go ahead.
I'm probably going to get in trouble. I'm worrying about me, but whatever. So I will say I actually used to be a prosecutor. I mainly did child welfare CPS stuff, which is sort of a whole other mixed bag. But now I manage a statewide program that's specifically there to help families going through CPS cases. It's free, it's a nonprofit thing, and I'll tell you, I couldn't do my job now if I hadn't represented the state before. Because what I do now requires me to be an expert, and I never would have gotten that experience having not tried those cases. And so I think the us versus them mentality is a bit dangerous. And I will say that I have in the last 2-ish years doing the job I have now, I've been able to collaborate with CPS, statewide groups, all these people, and talk to them about issues, huge problems that families are facing in our state. And I have all this access, and it's very exciting, but part of it is because there is not an us versus them mentality. Collaboration is so important. And there are amazing criminal defense attorneys whose heart is in it. There are also some really good prosecutors that know they're not just wanting to put people in cages and put people in jail. Yes, that does happen. But there are many that don't like that, they don't love what they're doing. And I think until everybody really starts talking to each other and truly collaborating, I don't know if things are ever going to really get better. So that's just
absolutely. We've had Margaret Moore here, David Escamilla, people like that. You hear these stories, hear about how not having good indigent defense system affects people. That's why what Dr. Kelly said about asking where are the prosecutors, I think is a very, very important point. We need to say, I think the working group should be making recommendations to the current prosecutors saying, if you release people to appear, if you didn't ask for cash bond, if you didn't incarcerate people for being poor, how much would we save on our sheriff's budget?
Absolutely.
And then give that recommendation. If Margaret Moore doesn't implement it, well, David Escamilla is not running, but then you say, we need candidates to get her out of there so that we do get this money freed up. And you can do it overnight. I don't believe in incrementalism. I believe in drastic change. And you can have the public defender's office, you can have a new DA like Crusoe all at once. And I don't think it has to be, we get the public defender, and then they go and say, we advocate for the issues. We should do them both.
Yeah. Are you ready for DA?
Just so Chris knows, I think I can speak on behalf of everyone in the working group when I say that, we're hopefully coming to the finish line on this. None of us is going anywhere after this issue, after we kind of reach the next step in this issue. And to the other sort of, issues in the system that we've been talking about, I don't think anyone that I've been working with is singularly minded about this. We just know how important it is and how necessary it is in this moment. But I'm more than happy to start bothering the DAs in the county.
We're in a unique place. Austin, we're not like Dallas or somewhere that's kind of mixed. Everybody here, if they knew about the urgency, we would get it here. For example, we have a county judge sent her a state of the county address. It's great that the incarceration rate has remained the same. That is not great, and we need to have the advocacy to tell people that this is what's wrong, and that the community is progressive. They just need to know what the issues that are progressive are. Once we educate them that way and say this is the candidate that will bring the progressive reform, we get the reform we need.
So long after many of us are going to be worm food, a lot of these students who are here today will be continuing to improve the criminal justice system. We started off with many great UT law students, Nick and Karen, other folks in the room who are part of this indigent defense student public defense group. I want to turn it over to you to wrap things up and see, what do you think of this conversation? What do you want to leave us with?
Well, first, I really thank everybody for being here, whether you spoke or not, and I think we did do a really good job of focusing on the culture, and that was really our goal, is to make this about envisioning our dream public defender, and I thought we had some great ideas today, and we had really great natural conversations, so I just want to thank y'all for bringing all these great ideas to the table.
Cool. I'll just add one more thing there. So I guess for the next steps for how we can make all of these amazing ideas happen in reality is that the next step of when this is going to happen is a political process. People who are voted for are now going to vote themselves, right? The judges and the commissioners are now going to make the ultimate decision about implementing this proposal and having this go forward. And so
that's Tuesday.
Right.
Probably the next 3 Tuesdays, I would say, going and being in support of all of the work that the working group has done in terms of all of the kind of collaborative efforts that we've had to create this proposal going forward. It's been quite a glorious process to be such
You got to show up. You got to show up Tuesday at the Commissioners Court, and every Tuesday that they're going to raise this issue. The only people the commissioners see are us. If the commissioners feel the heat of the public and the scrutiny that the public is putting our elected officials under and our system under, then they will respond. But if they don't feel it, for whatever reason, then they think everything's, well, what was it? The emperor's new clothes. Everything's hunky-dory. So I think that Amanda would tell you that you gotta show up at the proper place to be at the decisive point to make things happen. It was at Selma, at the bridge, Montgomery, and this might not be that important to the larger scheme of things, but in our little corner of the world, you gotta be there Tuesday if you stand with us. We need you there.
It is, I think one of the law students said in a recent article, this is the civil rights history of our time.
It really
I don't know
is.
which one of you said that. One of you said that. The other day. So, all right, round of applause for all of our